The box was smaller than I remembered. 10 years, and it still fit in the same drawer, wrapped in the same faded blue paper, the corners gone soft from being folded and unfolded more times than I wanted to count. I stood in the doorway of his apartment, my duffel bag still on my shoulder, and I watched Daniel Reyes pull it out from under a stack of old sweaters like it was something sacred. "You kept it," I said. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. He didn't look up right away. His thumb moved over the paper, tracing the crease I'd made a decade ago when I was 18 and terrified and so in love with him I could barely breathe in the same room. "Of course I kept it, Milo," he said. "I kept everything." That was the moment I knew this trip was going to break me open in ways I hadn't prepared for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the summer we were 19, back to the porch light that stayed on too late, back to the night I almost kissed him and didn't, and the 10 years of silence that followed because I was a coward and he was too proud to chase someone who ran. Daniel and I met the way most best friendships start, by accident, in a place neither of us wanted to be. Freshman orientation at a university 3 hours from both our hometowns, both of us folding chairs at the edges of a room full of strangers, both of us pretending we weren't scared out of our minds. He sat down next to me because every other seat was taken. That was it. That was the whole cosmic significance of it, a full room and a stubborn seating chart. He had a gap in his front teeth that showed when he laughed, and paint-stained fingers from a summer spent helping his uncle repaint houses, and he introduced himself by saying, "I'm Daniel, and I already regret coming here," which made me laugh so hard the RA gave us a look. We were inseparable within a week. That's not an exaggeration, it's just what happened. He had the kind of presence that rearranged a room around him without trying, warm and steady and a little bit reckless, and I was the quiet one who noticed everything and said nothing. We balanced each other out. Or at least, that's what everyone told us, over and over, until it became the story we told about ourselves. For 2 years, that was enough. Late-night walks across campus when neither of us could sleep. Sharing one pair of earbuds on the bus because his had broken. The specific, comfortable silence of doing homework in the same room without needing to fill it with words. I didn't have a name yet for what I felt when he fell asleep with his head on my shoulder during a movie, or when he'd reach over and fix my collar without asking, like his hands had a right to be there. I told myself it was just friendship. Everyone has a best friend who feels like this, I said to myself, lying awake at 2 in the morning with his laugh still echoing in my chest. Everyone. I was wrong, and some small, terrified part of me had known it the whole time. The summer we turned 19, Daniel's family invited me to their lake house for 2 weeks. It was the kind of place where the days blurred into each other, mornings spent fishing off the dock, afternoons doing absolutely nothing productive, evenings on the porch watching the sky turn the color of a bruise healing. It was the 7th night when everything started to shift. We were sitting on the dock, feet in the water, the last of the sun bleeding orange across the lake. Daniel had been quiet for longer than usual, which for him was unusual enough that I'd noticed. "Can I tell you something?" he said, not really a question, "and you promise not to make it weird?" My heart did something complicated in my chest. "I promise. I think I'm bi." He said it fast, like he needed to get the words out before he lost his nerve. "I've known for a while. I've never said it out loud before." The water lapped quietly against the dock posts. Somewhere behind us, his mom's wind chimes shifted in the breeze. I didn't say anything for a second too long, and I watched him start to panic at my silence, his shoulders curling in like he was bracing for something. "Milo. I'm gay," I said. The words fell out of me before I'd decided to say them, blunt and unpolished, 10 years of careful hiding undone in 3 syllables. "I've never told anyone either." He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and something passed between us that I didn't have language for yet. Relief, maybe. Recognition. The particular, dizzying feeling of being seen by the one person whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's in the world. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay. Good. I mean, not good that you had to hide it, just, I'm glad it's you, I told first. Me too, I whispered. We sat there for a long time after that, closer than we'd been a minute before, though neither of us had consciously moved. His shoulder pressed against mine. I could feel the warmth of him through his damp t-shirt, could hear the unsteady rhythm of his breathing, and when I turned my head, his face was so close that I could count his eyelashes in the dying light. "Milo," he said, and his voice had dropped into something quieter, something that made my stomach flip. "Yeah." He didn't answer. He just looked at me, his eyes moving from my eyes to my mouth and back again, and I felt my whole body lean toward him without permission, drawn like a compass needle finding north. His hand found mine on the wood of the dock, fingers slotting between mine like they'd been carved to fit there. We were an inch apart. Maybe less. I could feel his breath against my lips, warm and a little shaky, and every nerve in my body was screaming at me to close the distance. And then his mom called us in for dinner. The moment shattered. We pulled apart so fast it was almost violent, both of us laughing too loudly to cover the way our hands were trembling, and neither of us said a single word about what had almost happened. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not for the remaining 7 days of that trip, though I caught him looking at me more than once across the porch, across the boat, across the narrow hallway of his family's house, with an expression I didn't have the courage to name. I told myself we'd talk about it eventually. I was wrong about that too. The thing about almost moments is that they don't disappear just because you refuse to acknowledge them. They calcify. They become the quiet architecture underneath everything else, and you build your whole life slightly around their shape without admitting that's what you're doing. For the rest of that summer, something had shifted between Daniel and me, subtle but unmistakable, like a photograph slightly out of focus. We were still best friends. We still spent every possible hour together. But there was a new awareness humming under the surface of it, the way his hand would linger half a second too long when he passed me something, the way I'd catch him watching me and he wouldn't look away fast enough, the way conversations would trail off into silences that felt loaded instead of comfortable. Junior year, we got an apartment together. It made sense on paper, we were already spending every night at each other's places anyway, and splitting rent was cheaper than 2 dorm rooms. But living together turned the volume up on everything I'd been trying not to feel. I learned the specific sound of his footsteps on the stairs. I memorized the way he hummed off-key while making coffee, always the same 3 songs, always slightly wrong. I started noticing things I had no business noticing, the muscles in his forearms when he carried groceries, the way his t-shirts rode up when he stretched, the particular, devastating softness in his voice when he was falling asleep on the couch and murmured my name like it belonged to him. We never talked about the dock. We never talked about the almost kiss, if that's even what it was, or the fact that neither of us had dated anyone in the 2 years since. I told myself it was because we were both busy. I told myself a lot of things. It was February of that year when Daniel's grandmother passed away, and I watched my best friend fold in on himself with grief in a way I'd never seen before. He didn't cry in front of people, not even me, not for the first 3 days. He just went quiet and small and distant, moving through our apartment like a ghost of himself, and it terrified me more than anything had in years. On the 4th night, I found him sitting on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m., back against the cabinets, staring at nothing. "Hey," I said, sliding down to sit next to him without asking. "You don't have to talk. I'll just sit here." He didn't say anything for a long time. And then, without warning, he broke, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere old and unguarded, shoulders shaking, breath catching. I did the only thing I knew how to do. I put my arms around him and pulled him against my chest, and he let me, which surprised me more than anything, because Daniel Reyes did not let people hold him together. He was always the one holding everyone else. "I'm sorry," he said into my shoulder, voice wrecked. "I don't know why I'm like this." "You're allowed to be like this," I told him, my hand moving in slow circles on his back. "You loved her. It's supposed to hurt." We stayed like that for almost an hour, until his breathing evened out and the tension left his body by degrees. And then, in the quiet after, He lifted his head and looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and raw and so open that it stole the air from my lungs. "Can I tell you something?" he asked, echoing the words from that night on the dock 2 summers before. "Anything. I think about you all the time." His voice was barely above a whisper. Not just as a friend. "I've thought about you like that for years, Milo. Since before the lake house. I just never knew how to say it without ruining everything." My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Daniel. You don't have to say anything back," he said quickly, panic creeping into his voice. "I just needed you to know. Especially now. Especially tonight." I reached up and touched his face, my thumb brushing away the last of the tears on his cheek, and I felt him go still under my hand like he was holding his breath for what came next. "I've thought about you like that too," I said. "For years. I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Of losing you. If it went wrong. Daniel, you're the most important person in my life. I couldn't survive losing that." He leaned his forehead against mine, and for a moment neither of us moved, both of us suspended in the terrifying, electric space of a decision we'd been circling for 2.5 years. "What if it doesn't go wrong?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer for that. Instead, I closed the last of the distance between us and kissed him, soft, hesitant, both of us shaking slightly, 2 years of almost finally resolving into something real. His hand came up to cradle the back of my neck, and I felt something in my chest unlock that I hadn't known was closed. It was, without question, the best moment of my entire life up to that point. It was also, in a way I couldn't have predicted, the beginning of the end. Here is the thing nobody warns you about when two best friends finally admit what they've been avoiding for years: the falling in love part is easy. It's the staying in love, out loud, in front of the world, that's hard. For 3 months after that night, Daniel and I were happier than I'd ever been. We didn't tell anyone at first, some private, cautious instinct to protect the fragile new thing between us before the world got its hands on it, but eventually, we told our closest friends, and then, more nervously, our families. His parents took it well. Mine did not. I won't dwell on those months, because they're not really what this story is about, but I'll say this: watching your best friend, your boyfriend, the person you loved more than anyone, witness your own family struggle to accept who you were was its own particular kind of pain. Daniel held my hand through every difficult phone call. He sat with me on the bathroom floor the night my father said something I still can't repeat. He never once made me feel like a burden for needing him that badly. But grief and stress have a way of finding cracks in even the strongest foundations, and somewhere in the middle of that hard, beautiful, complicated year, I started pulling away from him without meaning to. Not out of anything he did wrong. Out of fear. Out of some broken logic that told me if I loved him a little less openly, it would hurt a little less when, not if, when, my traumatized brain insisted, it all fell apart. Daniel noticed before I even fully admitted it to myself. "You've been different," he said one night in April, both of us lying in the dark of our shared bed, a careful 6 inches between us that hadn't existed in months. "Distant. Did I do something?" "No," I said, too fast. "I'm just tired. Work's been a lot." He was quiet for a long moment. "You know you can talk to me, right? About anything. That hasn't changed just because he gestured vaguely between us. This. I know. I didn't talk to him. That was my first real mistake, not the almost kiss I never took, not the years of silence before, but this, the deliberate, cowardly choice to keep my fear locked inside instead of trusting the one person who had never once given me a reason not to. By June, the distance between us had become a kind of permanent weather. We still lived together. We still loved each other, I never doubted that, not for a second, not even later, but something essential had gone quiet between us, replaced by a careful politeness that felt worse than any fight could have. The end, when it came, wasn't dramatic. That's what still haunts me about it, honestly, I'd braced myself for something explosive, some final devastating argument, and instead it was just Daniel sitting across from me at our kitchen table on a Tuesday night, looking exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I don't think I can keep doing this," he said quietly. "Not you. Us. I can't keep loving someone who's already halfway out the door, Milo. It's exhausting, watching you brace for an ending that isn't coming unless you make it happen." "That's not fair," I said, though even as I said it, some small honest part of me knew it was exactly fair. "Maybe not. But it's true." He reached across the table and took my hand, and even then, even at the end, his touch was gentle. "I love you. I need you to know that, whatever happens after this. But I can't be the only one fighting for us. I didn't fight for us. That's the part of this story I'm least proud of." I let him move out 3 weeks later. I let him take the paintings he'd made for our apartment and the mug I'd bought him for his birthday and the small, careful pieces of a life we'd built together, and I told myself it was for the best, that I was protecting both of us from something worse. The last thing he gave me before he left was a small box wrapped in blue paper, a gift I'd given him for our first anniversary, one he'd never opened, tucked into a drawer for reasons he never explained. He handed it back to me at the door, his eyes wet, his voice steady in a way that told me he'd rehearsed this. "Keep it," he said. "Or don't. I just can't take it with me. Not yet." I didn't understand what he meant then. I understand it now. We didn't speak again for 10 years. 10 years is a long time to carry a silence. I built a life in that decade, not a bad one, not an empty one, just a life that existed a half-step removed from the one I'd wanted, the way a photograph slightly out of frame still shows you the shape of what you missed. I dated other people. None of it stuck, not in any way that mattered. I moved cities twice. I built a career I was proud of. And underneath all of it, quiet but persistent as a heartbeat, I thought about Daniel Reyes more often than I ever admitted to anyone, including myself. It was a mutual friend's wedding that brought us back into the same room. I almost didn't go. I spent 3 weeks agonizing over the RSVP, imagining every version of seeing him again, rehearsing conversations I was terrified I'd never actually get to have. He was standing near the bar when I walked in, and for one suspended, silent moment, 10 years fell away like they'd never happened at all. He looked older, of course he did, we both did, a little more gray at his temples, the lines around his eyes deeper from a decade of living. But his eyes found mine across the room with the same immediate, magnetic recognition they always had, and something in my chest cracked open that I'd spent 10 years carefully keeping shut. "Milo," he said, when I finally worked up the courage to cross the room. Just my name, but it landed like an entire conversation. "Hi, Daniel." We talked for 4 hours that night. Careful at first, the safe, surface-level catching up of two people rebuilding a bridge they'd once burned, and then, as the night wore on and the wedding guests thinned out, something more honest crept back into the space between us. He told me about his life, the apartment he'd bought, the dog he'd rescued and named after a character from a show we used to watch together. I told him about mine, the career, the cities, the relationships that never quite worked because some part of me was always comparing them to something I refused to name. "Can I ask you something?" I said, near the end of the night, both of us sitting on the curb outside the venue like we were 19 again. "Why did you never open that gift? The one you gave back to me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because I already knew what was in it," he said finally. "You told me, remember? Before you gave it to me. You said it was something that would remind me of that summer at the lake. I think some part of me knew, even then, that if I opened it after everything fell apart, it would break me completely. So I just kept it closed. Kept it safe. I figured someday I'd either open it with you, or I'd never need to open it at all. You still have it? Milo." He looked at me like the answer was obvious, like it had always been obvious. "I never stopped having it." That was 3 days before he invited me to his apartment, the moment I opened this story with, the two of us standing in his doorway, 10 years of unfinished history folded into a small blue box between us. "Open it," I said now, my voice barely steady. "Please." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he peeled back the paper, the same paper, somehow, still intact after a decade, like he'd handled it with the kind of care usually reserved for something breakable. Inside was a small wooden frame, one I'd made myself that long ago summer, holding a photograph of the two of us on his family's dock, taken by his mother the week before everything changed. We were both laughing in the photo, mid-conversation, caught in a moment so unguarded and happy that looking at it now felt like looking through a window into a life I'd almost let slip away entirely. On the back, in my 19-year-old handwriting, I'd written, "Whatever happens, this was real. M." Daniel read it twice. 3 times. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were bright with unshed tears, and something in his expression had cracked all the way open. "I should have opened this 10 years ago," he said quietly. "I should have fought harder 10 years ago," I said. "For us. I let fear make my decisions for me, and I lost the best thing I ever had because of it. I've regretted it every single day since." "Milo. Let me finish. Please." My hands were shaking, but I made myself keep going, because I'd spent 10 years not saying the things that mattered and I refused to make that mistake again. "I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day of the last 10 years. I dated other people because I thought I was supposed to move on, but none of it ever felt like this. Like you. I don't know if there's a version of this where we get to start over, but I needed you to know that if there is, I'm not scared anymore. I'm done running." The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of something enormous. And then Daniel crossed the small distance between us, cupped my face in both hands the way he had that night in our kitchen 10 years before, and kissed me, slow, certain, a decade of everything we'd lost and everything we might still get back folded into a single unhurried moment. "I never stopped either," he murmured against my mouth. "I just didn't know how to say it without falling apart." "Then don't say it," I whispered back. "Just stay." He pulled back just far enough to look at me, his thumb tracing gentle circles against my cheekbone, and for the first time in 10 years, I saw my own future reflected clearly in someone else's eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not this time." We stood there for a long time after that, wrapped around each other in the doorway of an apartment that suddenly felt like it could become something more, a home, maybe, if we were brave enough this time to build it together. 10 years of silence unraveling into something soft and certain and finally honest. Some love stories end. Ours, it turns out, was only ever paused, waiting, patient as a folded piece of blue paper in the back of a drawer, for both of us to become brave enough to open it again. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with Milo and Daniel's story until the very end. If this touched something in you, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story like this one, drop a like if you were rooting for them, and let me know in the comments what you'd have done in Milo's place. There's more to tell, what happened in the months after that doorway, whether Daniel's dog approved, whether Milo finally made peace with his family. Should I tell you what happened next?